Hey there gamers, DreamcastGuy here, and today we're talking about Resident Evil 9 because late last night a huge leak kind of dropped onto the internet that seems to explain a bunch of completely new details apparently about the game, including its main characters, its setting, where it's going to be in the timeline, and a bunch of stuff like that. So I want to discuss it because obviously I love Resident Evil, but additionally I'm fascinated about how this series has started to change. If you're like a newer fan of Resident Evil, perhaps this isn't as mind-blowing, but this recent entries, even the last 10 years, stuff like Resident Evil 7, 8, the remakes that have been incredibly spectacular, we're seeing that each of the Resident Evils continues to get bigger and better and better and better. And this one seems to be the greatest pivot of all. But let's discuss. Hi, hope you're having a great day, and if you could please give this video a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Now, I do want to be clear, we're going to go through all the bullet points of this list, but this comes from Biohazard Declassified. Now, if you don't know this guy, he's done a bunch of different leaks in the past, and I would say he has a pretty good track record. He's pretty good about where he gets his info, but this one specifically, this leak seems to be from playtest data. Now, there have been previous leaks of playtest data for Resident Evil 8 that seemed rather impossible at the time that turned out to be completely true. Essentially, before a game comes out, especially if you're trying to do something that's too dangerous or too experimental, you kind of internally test it. You bring in people, put them under NDA and go, okay, play this level, check out this monster. What do you think about it? Does this still feel Resident Evil? And so when the playtest leaks came out for Resident Evil Village, people completely did not believe them because they were talking about werewolves and people wearing armor and stuff, even though they were basically zombies. And all of that turned out to be completely correct, and that was also leaked by Biohazard Declassified. But the reason we do need to take this with a grain of salt is that as accurate as this reporting is, it's not quite Dusk Golem. Now, if you've never heard of this guy, I've talked about him a bunch in the past, but Dusk Golem, aka the Aesthetic Gamer, this dude does a bunch of very big insider leaks about Capcom, about Konami, about stuff involving Silent Hill and Resident Evil. This guy has a 100% track record, and he's chimed in a bit, but not much on RE9. So let's take a look at this list, though. Let's see what's actually crazy cool. So, huge possible spoilers, read at your own risk. The game takes place 4 years after Resident Evil Village. Now, here is the thing that people are losing their minds about the most, which is the main characters and the supporting characters. Jill Valentine and Leon Kennedy are both back, and they're going to be the main characters. Also, Chris Redfield and Barry Burton are supporting characters. Now, Resident Evil fans have been just begging to actually get a team up between Jill Valentine and Leon Kennedy, because not only are they, in my opinion, they're the most fan favorite. People absolutely go ballistic for these guys. But I think part of what leads credence to this is not just the popularity, but the fact that they decided to make Resident Evil 4 Remake such a big budget game before doing Code Veronica Remake or anything like that. There have been some leaks and rumors that perhaps we're going to get a smaller budget Code Veronica Remake or possibly a Resident Evil 0 Remake, which to me, both those projects sound top-notch. I'm still completely obsessed with Code Veronica, but it did kind of seem like the franchise was priming us for a return to Leon Kennedy, and especially Jill Valentine coming back, especially after the recent movie Death Island. That sounds great. But also Chris Redfield, who obviously plays a big role in Resident Evil 7 and 8, having him come back with Barry Burton, this is really an all-star cast. And we haven't seen much of Barry Burton other than the first game, and then of course Revelations. Okay, I'm getting too in the weeds. Let's keep going here. Jill is dressed more tactically similar to her look in Resident Evil 5 Lost in Nightmares. Leon Kennedy is dressed similar to his look in Resident Evil Damnation. So I'm going to put up pictures of what both those characters look like, but essentially much more combat gear focused. It also says Jill Valentine looks the same as she did in Resident Evil Death Island. However, Leon looks much older. Putting these characters up on screen, these iterations, the costumes it's referring to here, I think this is actually conveying something, which is that I have seen a lot of Resident Evil fans, especially of the newer generation, kind of asking, when are we going to get new characters? Not even in a detrimental fashion, but it is kind of weird to think about the fact that Leon specifically, just using him as an example, he has now been fighting the forces of the undead for like 30 years. Didn't it first came out in 1996? So that small town cop that survives Raccoon City and then goes on all these crazy adventures, goes against Red Umbrella, Blue Umbrella, the guy who's jumping into volcanoes and fighting against Wesker and stuff like that. Well, that was Chris Redfield. But my point is the fact that I think at some point they are going to attempt to retire these characters. And it does seem like Resident Evil 9 could be a chance to, even if they don't kill them, which obviously, personally, as a person that loves these characters a lot, I don't want them to die. But it could be a good passing of the torch and having them aged up, more militarized. I think that could be a good way of kind of signaling the next generation is about to take over. Give us younger heroes that can do their 30 years as character leads. All right, next up here. Oh, we're getting into some plot details. Main plot, Jill from the BSAA, which obviously is from Resident Evil 5 most predominantly, but we've heard about them a lot. They're like an anti-bioterrorism group. Jill Valentine from the BSAA and Leon from the DSO, who investigate an island where a company creates Eveline resides. You know what? I'll be honest. It's been so long since I played RE7. I can't remember how Eve's name is pronounced. Eveline? Anyways, they're creating mass clones of Eveline with the Megamycete. So, in RE7, there's this stuff, the mold. There's mold monsters and stuff like that. And it turns out in the big plot twist that it is this little kid, you sort of think, but it's this girl who has this biohazard inside of her. This mold that can control people, it can manipulate people, it can make you fight and kill and act against your own best wishes. And it's because Eve is trying to build this family. And so we saw more of this in Resident Evil 8. We saw the Megamycete, the mastermind. It's like a giant brain that's controlling all the mold monsters and stuff like that. The idea of going back to the Resident Evil 8 storyline and kind of finishing it off much more completely does to me make sense of not just killing the Megamycete, but kind of having a company that has managed to create these clones of Eveline. I mean, weaponizing it on a mass scale. Like one Eveline, oh God, I'm sure somebody in the comments going to roast me if I mispronounce that name. One Eveline, whatever her name is, one of those could destroy an entire city, an entire country, because where she gets dropped, it pretty much puts out a pollen of madness, causing everybody to kill each other or get controlled. I mean, she could literally take out military bases and stuff. So a company trying to make that, it does feel like the next evolution of the bioweapons that Umbrella was originally experimenting with. You know, the T virus, the G virus, Titans, Nemesis, stuff like that. But the idea of this is kind of interesting. Chris and Barry support Jill via radio calls. One mentioned Rosemary Winters. Interesting. So obviously Rosemary is Ethan Winters' daughter. The fact that she's actually going to be, I mean, she's probably going to be mentioned, but if this only takes place 4 years after, she's not even 5 years old in it. But it's interesting. They're probably going to be referencing the sacrifice of Ethan and stuff like that. They'll use Rosemary's blood to create a vaccine for the residents of the island. Man, this is pretty heavy-duty spoilers. Damn, this is interesting. Jill and Leon are infected by the Megamycete, so it sounds like they are, in a way, kind of redoing some of the DLC from Resident Evil 8. Now, if you didn't play it, the Ethan Winters expansion, they called it, it was incredibly good. It essentially really showed this flash forward to an adult Rosemary, where Rose is now actually going into the Megamycete to try and end the whole darkness of the mold once and for all. It's incredibly good. It's incredibly spooky. So the idea of kind of following up on that Megamycete storyline to actually go back and finally rid all the Evelines to take down this company, it's a very different direction. But also using Rose's blood to create a vaccine is such an interesting choice thematically. I do feel like whenever it comes to Resident Evil, almost all the problems are solved via nuclear bombs if you're blowing up Raccoon City, it's shooting monsters in their big gooey eyeball that they all have for some reason, or it's just trying to run away. It's interesting, the idea of actually trying to cure or inoculate people, saving a population instead of just shooting your way in and shooting your way out. I'm kind of fascinated by that. We'll see how it actually turns out, but it certainly has my interest. Going back to the post here, it says, Blue Umbrella will return. The island location consists of an abandoned hospital, caves, abandoned houses, a dark forest, an abandoned factory, a laboratory, and a temple. I kind of wish they'd said something besides abandoned 18 different times, but that does sound very interesting. Man, we're getting so much here. Main enemies will be evolved zombies, similar to the Ganados in RE4. They can also use melee weapons. They worship the moon and have moon tattoos on their arms. They can be heard singing to the moon while looking out at the sea. So there have actually been multiple sources that have said this specifically. Some of this stuff is actually being sort of repeated from previous leaks. I'm sure it's that different leakers are talking about it, different people are getting this information, but it does sound like this game is probably going to be very open world. There's been multiple leaks now that they're trying to make this game much more big and expansive. The way they're doing that with Monster Hunter Wilds, which I think just had one of the biggest betas of all time. I think the idea of making this a big open world game with multiple locations that we probably visit and then revisit, different monsters that perhaps have different hunting territories and different behaviors, that's all great. But to me, the part that's perhaps the most intriguing is that contained, connected mythos. I loved the weird mythology of RE8. Resident Village and its weird background of trying to explain the origin of the Umbrella logo and talking about the Spencer family and the Megamycete. I thought that stuff was deeply, deeply, deeply fascinating. I feel like I'm going way too into the weeds, becoming too much of a geek. I just love Resident Evil's lore so much. So the fact that it does sound like this game is going to keep the action, keep the characters we like, but move it forward and keep that lore, this sounds freaking delicious. But let me go back to it here. They can be heard singing to the moon while looking out at the sea. Leon will be stalked by a constant enemy, while Jill will be attacked by the Goatman. The antagonist is called Mr. Simon. Playtests were held in April and September. April playtests had Jill in an abandoned hospital, while the September playtest included Leon in a forest. Resident Evil 9 will be close to Resident Evil 7 and Village Story with the Megamycete. What do you think? This sounds fantastic. I feel like Capcom has put themselves in such an interesting, and I think in a situation that's never happened before, where each and every Resident Evil for the last 10 years just keeps selling better and better and better. Every game before it, RE7 sells like millions and millions of units. RE2 Remake sells millions and millions of units. Their experimental stuff, their mainline stuff. I feel like Capcom is finally just going, okay, we trust the developers. We're just going to truly harden the paint, give them an entire playground, and set them free. I have seen a little bit of hesitation. Stuff like over here on the PlayStation 5 Reddit, I did see some people talking about the fact that they're not excited about the open world aspect. That's the biggest thing I think some people are very hesitant about, is that a lot of these open world games, the open worldness just explodes the budget, it increases dev time, and a lot of times having that filler content of running back and forth through huge open areas filled with zombies you don't want to fight 15 times, does that stay just as fun? That's the main criticism I hear about leaks like this, but personally, all of this sounds fantastic. But that's just my 2 cents. What do you guys think about Resident Evil Village? Why am I saying Village? What do you think about Resident Evil 9? It's rumored to be called Apocalypse. How do you feel about the apocalypse? Tell me your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe if you haven't already, and please keep dreaming. I need to throw this shirt away. I found this in the back of my closet, and I realized this shirt is... it just gets worse. The further down it goes, the worse it gets. Gotta throw this in the garbage. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.